Hi, I'm Lisa.
And I'm Johnny.
Today we're gonna talk about movies.
Horror movies, to be exact.
Because this is Gutted, and that's what we do. Train to Busan is my pick for today. Came out 2016, and it is a South Korean film, and it's a zombie film. I know that right around this time, 2016, and even more so now, zombie films are sort of losing their edge or have lost their edge. Train to Busan did something really heartfelt in its tragedy and in its disaster storytelling that it's actually become one of my favorites, and I've never heard of it before, so I looked up a couple of reviews. 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I know that that's like not always the thing to gauge it by, but I think it earned its 95%. Absolutely. One of the great ways that it does this is, first of all, it tackles what to do with the zombies that you're gonna have in the film. The director was really smart. We are so used to seeing the Romero zombie, okay? That is the staple, it's the foundation of how we were gonna deal with zombies in Hollywood. And you know, once we got to 28 Days Later, we elevated that a little bit and changed the game. And so the director built on that. So it's very 28 Days Later with the running, the sort of rabid behavior. But there's some interesting choreography that's new. They do this wickedly strange contortion, twisting, moving, where it's almost like the center of their body is pulling them against their will. And one of the best illustrations I think I can show without really giving anything away in this film, it's this scene right here. What do you do? What do you do? You're on the train, you see that shit. I don't know. I love disaster films because they make me ask myself that question. What kind of person am I gonna become? What decisions will I make? Will I run? Will I stay? Will I fight for people? Will I find some ounce of bravery? You know, I don't know. This film, it tells a story that's based on people figuring out who they really are and struggling against their conscience and finding that they walk a very fine line between, you know, a really amazing person or a really shitty person. And our lead does that. So the whole premise of this film is that, you know, this guy, he works all the time, he's a single dad, he's going through a divorce, and he hardly spends time with his kid, and his kid, she wants to spend all her time with mom because she has a better relationship. And so she tells her dad, I wanna go to mom's, take me to mom's. And of course they have to get on a train to Busan to get to her. And he says, yes, we'll go. And so they end up on this train. He is borderline a selfish person because he's already not spending time with his daughter. And then he comes up against himself in a moment when the chaos breaks out on the train, when the infection spreads, and it spreads lightning quick. He's in the safe part of the cabin and the door is open and he sees two people, one of which is pregnant, by the way. She's running towards him, her husband's right behind, and some asshole in the back is like, shut the door, shut the door. You see him struggle with himself and he closes it, just in their face. Her husband comes up and he yanks the door open, they go inside and he closes it. And when it all dies down, he looks at him and he's like, I think you owe me an apology. And they have that exchange about the fact that, hey man, like, we're not infected, you could have killed us, and you know, you were the deciding factor of whether or not we were gonna make it to another minute of this day. And so that's the first time he comes up against it. And he only allowed that door to open because his daughter had already made a connection with this couple earlier before. So he was listening to his daughter became his conscience. So that's the beginning when we start to see a lot of this struggle with selfishness, his own humanity, and what kind of journey he's gonna be on throughout the rest of the film. When I was younger, I used to watch films, zombie films in particular, because they were my favorite, and I used to rant and rave all day long about how people made stupid decisions, and if that was me, and I was in that particular situation, nobody's getting near me, I'm not trying to save anybody, I'm not making friends, it's just me against the world and the people I care about, and that's it. I don't give a fuck. I'm surviving. And the older I get, you know, the more that I start to wonder if that's valid. Now in American films, we always see this reinforcing of that idea, what I was just talking about. We punish people who are kind in disaster movies. Take any zombie film. When has it ever been an okay situation, and when did we see in the storytelling that our characters were rewarded for saving somebody, letting someone into the group that they didn't know, someone who may have been injured, trying to help other people? What do? We shit all over them, and we're like, yeah, you made a fucking mistake. You let that fucking stranger in. Bye. This film was the first time that I actually thought about it in a different way. I suddenly was having a different side of that argument, and there is this other part to humanity we're always forgetting, and it's that people are good too. We're not just jerks all the time. Like, we actually have a lot of good in us. This film rewards people who do kind things about, 80% of the time in the film. So one of the scenes that I thought really showed the heart of that message in its characters is, so these guys are trying to get to their loved ones because they were separated. And so these guys have decided they're gonna fight their way through like 4 cars to get to the people that they're trying to save. Now, when they do this, one of these guys is a high school kid. He showed up on the train with his teammates, and he gets to this cab, he sees all his teammates, and he can't function. And we don't berate him. The guys don't castrate him on screen. They look at him with sympathy, and they say, it's okay. You don't have to fight this fight. We understand. There's also something else interesting that happens here too, but check out this clip. So at the very end of that clip, we actually see something different with our zombies, and this is where I can actually start talking a little bit more about how zombies play a role in this film. They get into the tunnel, and these zombies are face to face with their victims, and the second they get into that tunnel and the lights start flashing by, it's like they don't see them anymore. They're completely distracted, and here we have something new, some new information. They're not dependent on smell, they're dependent on sound and sight, the things that it like a fucking T-Rex, right, from Jurassic Park. So if you don't move, maybe they won't see you, which is an interesting part because we've gotten so used to like Walking Dead, they can smell you, and so it gives their characters a little bit more ammunition to survive by outsmarting their smarting their attackers. Another thing, there's no gore. They didn't do this with severe amounts of gore. There's no spilling intestines, brains splattering everywhere. We get a little bit of carnage, and that's it, which I think is fantastic. Another thing we don't see, gunfire. This entire movie, nobody actually kills a zombie. We actually never learn how to kill them, so we don't even know if the rules apply here that if you shoot them in the head, they go down, because nobody has a gun. Kudos to the director for being able to achieve that. Train to Busan is a fantastic film that I highly recommend, especially if you're a fan of zombie films and you're looking for something a little bit unique, something that has a little more humanity in it than just blood, guts, gore, and gunfire. It's a great film, a great experience, so definitely check it out.
All right, I'm going to be talking about Kwaidan from 1964. This is a Japanese film directed by Masaki Kobayashi. He's a famous director in Japan, came out in the 50s. Interestingly enough, this was his first movie in color. He did a few more before this in black and white. It was actually nominated for a Foreign Language Film Academy Award nomination. It was also premiered at Cannes Film Festival. It just got a Criterion Collection treatment in 2015, which is the copy I picked up. The way the director wanted it to be presented was in this format, and I was quick to get it when it came out in 2015 just because I've heard so much about it. Read some lists online about how creepy this movie is and how great the cinematography is, and pretty much everything up my alley that I love in films, and the fact that it's also a ghost story, I absolutely loved this film. Kinda is a period piece, feudal Japan kind of vibes. You get a lot of the great costuming and the settings from this era, and it also has a twist to it as well, of course, with the ghost stories. And these ghost stories are adapted from an early 20th century author, Lafcadio Hearn, and these were actually handpicked stories by Kobayashi, the director, and they're all unrelated to each other. You get the vibe, at least, that when I watched it, that he picked these stories because they had the most promising visual appeal, like something that would adapt well to film. The movie starts in a really artsy way right from the get-go. With the opening title cards, it looks as if there's ink dye being dropped into water. I don't know how they accomplished this, but it's a really unique shot. That mixed with weird sound effects, it gives you an unnerving feeling. So even though the stories are sort of disconnected, I think one thing you could say that's in common about all of them is that each one deals with a character having struggles of some sort, and that manifests into something supernatural. What I also like about each story is they're not a standard format. It's not like, here's the character with a voiceover narrative, and then that's how the next story goes. They all kind of approach the story in a different way. In the third story, there's an excellent scene that opens up, and it's a story told of a famous battle from the past between two clans, and it's on the ocean and they're on boats. There's no sound effects. When swords clash, you don't hear them, and it's really unique. Most of the time in these stories, you kind of know what's going on. You can easily guess. They're not trying to throw these unique twists at you. I think it's more about style and substance than trying to really throw you off as a viewer in terms of understanding the story. In the last story, you have a number of questions after you watch it, whether or not the character was really hallucinating on his own, or maybe some of the demons from his past were coming back. He appeared to be some sort of warrior at one time, so maybe these are ghosts that are coming back, people that he had killed. Maybe he's been through so many battles that these are just some of them trying to come back to haunt him. One thing I really like about the sound effects as well, either they're sometimes not there, as I mentioned before, or they're off. Like, for example, there's a character in the first story. He goes back to visit his wife that he had left. He's just apologizes to her for leaving her, and all these strange things start happening, and he gets a little freaked out. So he starts stumbling and hits the ground, but you hear the sound of him falling on the wood like 3 seconds later. And then sometimes he'll fall on something and break it. You don't hear that sound, but then there's another sound effect that happens. But they're all sounds that actually are happening on the set, but they decided to put them in different areas, and it really makes for this unique nightmarish scene too. There's a part where there's a character even that's trying to run, but in slow motion. And some of you may be able to relate to this, but when you have a nightmare and you're trying to run and everything's kind of slow and sluggish, they capture that in one of the stories, and I just thought they did it so great visually. The number one thing I was totally impressed by this movie was the sets and the set design. Most of this was filmed actually indoors, and there was Japanese sound stages at the time that weren't big enough for the vision that the director wanted. So they ended up using actual airplane hangars to build these large sets. There are scenes that they have to be in a forest, but it's indoors, and there's snow everywhere too, and you can just tell they're probably blasting fans to blow the snow everywhere. The one giveaway that they are actually in a soundstage environment though is the horizon and the wall. They're trying to make it appear that it's really far away, but it's actually clearly painted, hand painted or something. And it kind of threw me off and took me out of the moment for a little bit, but I didn't really have too much of an issue with it. They're fantastical stories, and there's also large bodies of water. some of these scenes take place too. So that really impressed me, the fact that they were able to get all of this together, the crew, the amount of crew that had to go into putting that all together. It's really fascinating. So yes, this movie was created in the 60s, and with the experimentation of the different types of editing techniques and filming, there are some laughable moments. One example of the attempts for the special effects is there's one character who is actually trying to be hidden from a ghost. I know that sounds weird, but they are being visited constantly by a ghost. So they use this sutras, like special calligraphy, to draw on their bodies. And supposedly you're invisible to a ghost. So when they approach you, you can't be seen. But there's one key element to that he missed, and is the fact that he didn't get his ears. He didn't draw the calligraphy on his ears. So, as you probably can guess by now, the ghost actually saw only his ears. And if that sounds totally confusing to you, that's why you need to go see the movie, so it makes a little bit more sense. As from what I understand too, this movie was already in the hole in terms of budget when it started, so they were already having budget issues. But I really appreciated and respected what they were going for. They did a lot, when they were trying to do a ghost, they're trying to make them transparent, for example. You can see that it's sort of a little jump cut, and they try to dissolve them away, and they do all these really unique things. But it's great, though. It's forward thinking, and I think that kind of helped lay the groundwork for future movies of that style. One of the crew from the movie mentioned that the director was very hands-off with the editing approach, but then would come back and tell the editor after something was complete to change a little bit of things here and there. But for the most part, there was creative culmination between the musicians, the editing, all the different departments that put the efforts into this movie being created was really unique, and also has been described as something that really, it would be hard to recreate. And it could probably be duplicated, but there's something about all these creative minds coming together and knowing a little bit about the behind the scenes of the movie. It's really fascinating how they put this all together. And there's one thing to be said about the sound design in this movie and the soundtrack. It has a traditional Japanese style of music, but it also in a very kind of fast-paced and sort of unnatural beats, and it puts you on the edge of your seat a little bit with the visuals. There's also a lot of camera techniques used throughout the movie that kind of throw you off. There's a lot of, I've mentioned this in prior episodes, but with the Dutch tilt, that was actually pretty prominent in this movie too. One character having visions of someone there when they're not there, and they appear to be kind of sick, and that camera's sort of doing that motion like this. The camera's working with the story most of the time, and it really throws you off as a viewer. The story of ghosts in general is universally frightening, and I think this movie captures that aspect really well in presenting that in this type of format and this style. It's a very stylistic movie. Every scene you can tell is methodical, planned out. Framing wise, the cinematography is excellent. It puts you in an environment that's in this old feudal Japan setting with the characters, and there's great acting throughout. That's why I think it was so widely recognized, is because of those two things mixed together. You have ghosts mixed with a stylistic aspect and very bright, lush colors, and people were really receptive to that sort of style of filmmaking even back then. I recommend you check out Kwaidan. You can find it on YouTube. You do have to pay to watch it, but I found the Criterion Collection at a pretty good deal. So if you really want to delve into this movie, I recommend you do. It's one of those great movies you just kick back, watch, and really absorb all the great detail. So check it out and let me know what you think.
Goodnight Mommy, Austrian film, came out in 2014. So fair warning, there's no way to talk about this movie and not give away the ending. So if you haven't seen it and you're gonna get super upset that we're gonna give it away, then just stop now and come back after you watch it.
Yeah.
So the story takes place and it's way out in the country, and there's these twin boys and they have basically just each other. They don't really have that much interaction, not even with their mom when she comes home. But I feel like the director had a really good way of showing their isolation, because there's like no sound. There's no soundtrack. There's no music almost all the way through.
Yeah, you're right. It's very quiet movie. And also that isolation aspect of actually where they live too. They're not in a neighborhood. They're out in the middle of nowhere. And it adds to that, kind of follows that sort of horror movie theme where there's that isolation and crazy things can happen without too many people noticing. For the first quarter of the movie, you get the vibe that the mom, like something, it's just, there's something not right. I mean, obviously with the way she looks.
Right.
But the way she's treating her children, there's something wrong. And I think the first time that I was just like, oh no, I know for sure that something's gonna go down, was when they find that cat.
Oh,
no. And I just knew, like, they go out and play and they find this, like, I guess a cave or something, and there's this cat.
I gotta stop you right there.
Yeah.
The cave. Why are there human skulls in the cave? They never
touch
address
on that. Yes, that's true.
Is this like a European thing where there's just like catacombs just tucked away in the countryside or in like cities somewhere, and just you guys are just accustomed
I guess.
to it? Yeah. Oh, those are our ancestors there in my backyard.
Yeah,
cool.
right.
So I got a lot of cues right away that Lucas was not really there. Going into this film, I thought that there was something much bigger going to happen with the mystery of the mom and like her new personality. I thought that was really going to drag out in some kind of mystical way. And it kind of didn't. It got very like realistic.
Yes.
And so she's in the kitchen and she pours like some juice or like mixes some Kool-Aid type drink for her kids. Well, kid. And she gives it to him. Lucas leans in, whispers in his ear.
Yeah, it's like kind of that voice in his head, yeah.
And then the kid's like, oh, he wants some too. And then all of a sudden the mom's like super mean. She's like, oh, well, he can't have any or whatever she says.
You know what he did or something.
Or he's like, and you know why. And she like storms off. And I'm like, why would a mom deliberately ignore her kid like that? And I thought, well, maybe he did something earlier we didn't learn about. And she's like punishing him.
Yeah.
And then the real kicker came when the kid was like, where's my mom? What'd you do with my mom? Or you're not my mom or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then she makes him promise her that he's not gonna listen to his brother anymore or talk to his brother.
Yeah.
And I was like, who the fuck is this bitch telling him that he can't talk to his twin brother? Like,
that's really
jacked up. Super sadistic, manipulative crap. And I'm like, oh yeah, fuck this bitch.
Yeah.
She's terrible. I hope these kids fucking do something.
Right.
And then it hits me. I'm like, no parent would say that.
Right.
I mean,
that's pretty sick. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so why would she?
And then
there it is.
Yep. And people will get it probably at different moments throughout the movie. That was kind of the spot I thought about it too. But what really threw me off about that part too was we were seeing the perspective, I believe, of Lucas, right?
Yeah, he was outside the door.
Because he was outside the door, and that was the shot that was being shown. We were only hearing her talking to Elias, I think his name, right? So I think that was an attempt for the filmmakers to like, no, we want you to still try to think that they're still twins. How about the part though where she's tied up to the bed? That was pretty brutal. The fact that he was clever enough to make that orchestrate all that too. And
strong enough. See, that's the thing that kills me is that he's like, what, 12?
12, something like that, yeah.
And there's only one of him, if you really think about it. And he quietly snuck into his mom's room and tied her up to the bed so efficiently that with all of her might, and when her survival skills kick in, she still can't pull herself out of the bed.
Yeah, that was, I questioned that too. I was like, how is that happening?
But it did occur to me that, so the older we get as adults, we start to be more sympathetic about like states of exhaustion. Mm-hmm. Like she's super stressed out. She's going through a divorce. She lost one of her kids, and she's watching her living son, struggle with coping with his death. Mm-hmm. And she has to fight, all of her issues, and then help her son resolve his issues at the same time while still keeping a roof over their head and like moving forward with their life and stuff. So I think at some point this state of exhaustion could make sense that she just couldn't. Right. She just didn't have the willpower or the energy to rip herself from those
And that
restraints.
makes sense, both physically and mentally exhausted, and everything. And she's, like you said, she's stressed out with the fact that her son is having trouble coping with this. Then you kind of, I don't know if she handled the whole thing as she probably should have, though. Even then, I understand it was a terrible, traumatic event, whatever happened, and she just didn't know how to handle it, so she uses that as she gets angry because maybe she can't control the fact that he's still can't cope with his brother being gone. And she has that in the form of anger, and that's when they really trick you too. When she's really angry, and tells them they can't, watch things on their phone or do things that no talking at night or something. And it's all these strict rules. And I think she feels like that was in a way trying to help him. But
well, there was like a really quick moment too over the phone. She gets a phone call, she answers it, and then she quickly runs off. And it's she's saying something to somebody. She's like, I can't do this anymore. I have to tell him, or break it to him, or get him to realize. And so it kind of alludes to that they might have been doing this for a really long time.
Right. Perhaps. Yeah.
And so when it's one thing to deal with this for like a month or 2 months after a death, but like if it's going on 3 to 6 months and it just won't resolve itself, I mean, who wouldn't be frustrated? Who wouldn't get angry? I mean, and she's one person. Like, we don't ever see the dad. We don't even hear him call.
No.
We never hear her have a conversation with him. Like, it's pretty intense what she's dealing with. It's almost like the Babadook.
Yes, exactly.
I got a lot of Babadook vibes.
Babadook. It really goes into that psychological aspect of humans and how we handle certain things and how it could be dangerous if we don't handle it the right way.
One of the big things about this film, which makes it doubly scary, is the fact that it's a real syndrome.
Yes.
It's real.
Upon doing some research online, yes, it's a real thing.
Capgras syndrome is a real thing, and it's somebody who earnestly believes that somebody that they know has been replaced by an imposter.
I think what it really added to the whole tragedy of it all as well is the fact that Elias, he was also at odds with himself too.
You're right.
Yeah, it was really sad because, like you said, there was this belief that was not their mom. That was not their mom. Give us back our mom. They kept saying that.
And there was so much love there for their mom that they wanted their real mom back, and they were fighting so hard to get her back, thinking she was in trouble or something. And all of that love for their mom is almost the reason why they have so much aggression towards the person they think is pretending to be their mom, who happens to actually be their mom. Yeah. So like he has no idea that he's hurting the person he's trying to save.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Like, I found that to be one of the more heart-wrenching parts of the whole story.
I thought so too, yeah. I think there's symbolism galore in this movie, and you can interpret it in certain ways, but I think at the very end, you can all agree on one thing, and that's they have a pretty good twist that becomes a reality.
Yeah, it's a bit of a master storytelling technique to do the twist correctly, and the director absolutely did that with this film, and it was as a horror fan, I was going to say it's an enjoyable experience, but only because as a horror fan, knowing that I'm watching a movie, it was an enjoyable experience as far as being that audience member and being a fan of the genre. So, if you haven't seen it, watch it. If you have seen it, share your thoughts with us. And that pretty much wraps up our reviews today. So thank you for joining us. And hey, listen, if there's something that you think we should watch and review, or something that you want to hear more about, let us know. Send it to guttedreviews@gmail.com, and you may just see it on a future episode.